stay in there till they're get there.
Hey guys, so we're gonna go ahead and get restarted. I know that time is sadly crunching and passing us by.
Yeah.
And speaking of, we want to give Eric as much time as possible with his workshop. So we're gonna try to truncate this session down to about 20 minutes. But I do think it was really generative conversation that we were having that kind of right before we ended for lunch that really leads into this session. So we asked you guys to bring a piece of curriculum and activity with you. If you did not, that is fine. We have examples, or we have exemplars. So we have, we're going to kind of be talking about some lesson plans and how we can start to think about these things in a more practical, or kind of interrogating lesson plans, both from a practical standpoint, but also from a critical standpoint. So from there, we're going to kind of, you have each a resource sheet, which we'll talk about with some notes, but our general idea is that we want to give you some time to think about your lesson plans, especially in light of what Eric just shared with us. And then have some time to share out. We probably won't get to the final activity, which would be a post-it note activity and gallery walk. We can kind of maybe just share out our ideas from there. But
just by a show of hands, how many of you have brought maybe a sample lesson plan? Okay, that's okay. This is good to know. So
yes, I'm like, I came. You can choose your own destiny, like those novels. So I have just to give everyone the idea here. These I pulled from SBLC, which is the Adult Literacy Center that I work in, and this is some of the curriculum that they use in our courses. So we have Lesson Plan 1, Your Government and You, from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. And then we also have Lessons 1 and Lesson 10 from We the People, the Citizen in the Constitution, which is from the Center for Civic Education, Department of Education. So if you each would like, or if you would like to pick one, if you do not want to pick one, that's fine. So our plan originally was for you to bring some content in, but since you didn't, or some of you didn't, which is totally fine. Some of our questions were first to kind of get some context around why you chose what you chose. So I kind of explained why I chose what I chose, which is that these are the materials in my classroom that are used for civic education, both in our ESL classroom and our civic education classroom. And then the lesson plan that you guys have in front of you, that's what it's for. The L1 is for emergent literacy learners, so for some of those who are still learning some of those English skills. The We the People is for students who have a better command of English, print English. So what training did I receive for the curriculum to teach this topic? That would be zero. That would be absolutely nothing at all. And I think to Eric's point, I took on the role of kind of becoming a lifelong learner about some of these topics. It was kind of, here's the test, and here's some stuff you might be able to use to teach it. So that's kind of the context that I brought to it. But if anybody else wants to share, kind of maybe go ahead.
Just a quick question. So even if you didn't bring a lesson plan, which is totally fine, and I'm going to ask Maria maybe specifically about the context for the lesson plan that you brought in. Maybe if you could talk about, in terms of your organization, do the instructors have to receive any sort of formal training in order to teach the citizenship class? So maybe Annie or Christina.
What we do, we have for our adult ESL program, it's beginners to advanced, so level 1 to 5, and then we have English conversation that we have a program at our local library and at a local Catholic church, and those are drop-in when you can conversation with a teacher who guides the hour and a half, and that's for people that are on our wait list or just can't commit to anything more formal, or they want it on top of what they already do. And then we have the Ventures series. And that is what also, we're in Fairfax County, and Fairfax County's public school adult ed uses that curriculum. So we do have a portion that go on to adult ed classes for GED and things. So we do that. But then I think, so we do an in-house orientation, in-house training. And then there are times, because we are members of Pro Literacy and some other, and Virginia Literacy Foundation. So there are things that we can get because we have a very limited budget for training. But what we're very lucky is that some of our teachers, we have 24. And many of them, because of where we are former Peace Corps, military, government, so they're very comfortable with diversity. They've lived everywhere. We have retired people from all walks. And then we have some that are also teaching at NOVA, our local Northern Virginia Community College, and they also teach with us. So we kind of piece together a lot of our training. But it tends to work. We're always looking, for more opportunities. And then for we have non-traditional. The majority of adults in our class are here for their children. There may be, we have a portion that are going to obtain citizenship, but some just really need to have English to live, to be self-sufficient, to engage. So we have a curriculum, but it's also, we make it meaningful to their daily life. And we try and so a lot of our curriculum is based around that.
Awesome. I guess I should say our training does provide, our center does provide training for ESL and for teachers of ABE, but we do not provide any specific training around civic education and teaching civic education and civic literacy. So I guess I should make that clarifying point. This is one video. But I'm sorry. Anybody else kind of want to share their experiences around kind of PD or training working with civic education or civic literacy?
So I just taught the first class of citizenship last semester, which lasted 5 weeks. And
Congratulations!
just like you, I didn't receive any formal training. I was asked in the interview if I had any training or if I had any experience teaching any type of class, and I have. So that was kind of like the extent of it. Now that I understand the process a little bit more, and I'm teaching the basic level English class, I know that I need to develop the syllabus, which I did for this class. So now we'll go back to develop that when I teach the next citizenship round. And so, a lot of this information for me is very timely, because like I said, this is, I just taught only one citizenship class, which just concentrated on the process of writing the application and just learning the 100 questions. So I think, your part of what you were expressing to us today just goes a little bit farther into the civic area. But for me, it was just very focused, just make sure that people learn the 100 questions and they understand the application, because we only have 5 weeks.
They have a time.
Yeah.
Can I add to that? It's so good to meet all the teachers in the room. So I'm from the education division from the Office of Citizenship there. So I guess this is awesome seeing all you guys and all your programs with it. So add to the professional development part, if any of you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out. We do trainings all across the country. So if you want formalized training on citizenship education, we'd be happy to help you. And just really, we're all ESL teachers background, and all of us just educators here. I still teach myself here in DC. So we so many different, I'm already learning so many different things. So I'm actually working right now on a lesson plan, just like ones you're talking about, which I'd be happy to share. These are all things I could share with you on integration activities, service learning projects that are there. Also, another passion of mine is also children. I love the family literacy approach, really in integration. So if anyone needs resources on that, I can definitely, if you want to think about how you want civics education, citizenship education to tie in with the real needs and wants of your students, we can definitely have, like I said, we can have a lot of interesting conversations with that one. But one plug, and I will just, because it's the most common one, I think, out of everything you teach, do not just teach the 100 civics questions. Because as we mentioned, that is just such a small piece of why are we all in this room, right? Why are we all in this room? We didn't come here to memorize 100 civics questions, and neither did your students come and find you because of that. We are so much more. I always say, when someone says, I'm just ESL teacher, I'm like, no, you are like a social worker, you help them get a driver's license, you help their kid get in school. There's so much more to those pieces as you cover it there with it. So embrace it. And I'll be happy to, we can go page by page down your curriculum. We have all sample curriculum, sample lesson plans. Do not reinvent the wheel. And actually piece it together. And, you know, even if your funders make you do one thing, slip it in there. Slip in that service line. I did it too, service line. And I do have data for your, if depending on whichever it is, your test scores do go up, actually. It does show that. You have to tie it in, and it's a lot of work with it. And it's usually, it's not the students that are where the motivation is. You know, sometimes it's the teachers that push back because, you know, they don't want to go out and, you know, it's a lot of work sit there and try to go gardening and clean up a community. And it's a lot of work on the teacher to organize these things with it. But when you do it, it is very, very rewarding. And when you tie it in, as you did, you're teaching in context. So teach it in context to something. Actually, the data shows that, yeah, your test scores do go up.
Thank you. So maybe we have sort of like guiding questions that we thought maybe it would be something useful since we were talking about critical perspectives around ESL learning, advocacy, civic engagement, what does it mean to be a citizen? So I think everything that Eric was talking about, we wanted to also draw in questions about maybe looking at your teaching and how we're teaching civic education, citizenship education with our adult learners. And so there are a couple of questions that we had developed to sort of help us, kind of guide us in sort of this next conversation. And so if you want to take a look at, maybe review the lesson plan first, and there are 5 questions that we had. And again, all of these are using sort of like a critical lens, like how is the instructor positioned in the lesson plan? So as you take a look at learning outcomes, activities, like what is the instructor doing? What is the recommended suggestions for what students should be doing? How is the instructor positioned? So examples might be the instructor's facilitator, the instructor, the collaborator, the expert, other. And then question 2, how are the students positioned in the lesson plan? A lot of this, again, goes back to what Eric talked about, epistemologies. Like how do we think about even the way that we teach adult learners? What are our assumptions and views that we bring into how we teach them, right? So are the students positioned as collaborators, as experts, as novices, co-facilitators, other? 3, in the lesson plan, are there opportunities for students to consider civic education in critical ways? So for instance, raising questions about citizenship tests. Just an example, you know, why do I have to learn 100 questions? I guess that's all there is. Number 4, does the lesson plan invite students to be participants, right? Does it draw upon their prior knowledge, their experiences? They're all coming in with just a wealth of resource and experience and knowledge from you know, even before they came here to the U.S. So is there a connection there? And then lastly, what perspectives and assumptions about citizenship and civic education are implied in and through the lesson plan? So just some guiding questions. If you want to take a look at the lesson plan that Leah handed out.
Or that you brought.
Yeah, or that you brought, Maria. And then maybe we'll just kind of talk about some generative themes or just have like a discussion before we transition back to Eric.
So maybe, how long do we think? I don't want to rush people, but I also want to give people time to transition. But would 5 minutes be too quick? Maybe
To do what? To take a look at it?
to take a look at it and kind of think about some of these questions?
That seems pretty quick.
That's good. Okay.
That seems pretty quick.
I know, okay, so maybe 8?
8 minutes sounds
Okay,
really
8
good.
minutes.
It's a whole lot more than 5.
Say 8 and make it 10.
Okay, so let's say 8 and make it 10.
10.
Alright.
People would have a template on how to do it.
Alright, so
This is
looks like everybody had a chance to maybe get a cookie, look at some lesson plans, hang out. We'd like to kind of address some of these questions, and then perhaps take some notes, share them with the group, see if we can come to some sort of shared understanding, or not, that's fine too. I think we wanted to kind of start with actually question 3. which is in the lesson plan that you have, or you can think about your own lesson plans as well. Certainly, I provided those to you, but think back on what you have in your own classrooms, in your own programs. Are there opportunities for the students to consider civic education in topics in critical ways? And if so, what are they?
I think in this lesson plan, I've used CIS's lesson plans, and I like them a lot as a base. I think they provide a really great base for the information and the way it's structured. But to the question of the critical component, critical thinking around it, I think you need to add to it. And I think you need to offer the students more opportunity to participate and respond. And I don't think it's not necessarily, this is, I think meant to be a base, right?
It's a base, it's not a textbook. Yeah.
Right, but it's really, really helpful. It has been super helpful. But in terms of getting the students to participate and to respond requires more to the lesson plan. So for example, and it's a lot to read.
Oh my goodness.
Like when you sit down and you can't, they're just glazed over and you try to get through too much reading. I would say, starting with like one page, using that as sort of, okay, grounding the discussion and pulling out the vocabulary, and then talking and saying, like this one page on becoming a citizen, that's when you can get into their personal stories. Why? Yeah, the second page. Why are you here, and why do you want to become a citizen? And that is, that's where the interesting stuff happens. So that would be my comment about the critical thinking, not as it's written per se, but you can add to it to involve some more critical research.
There were some questions about, in your country, can you vote? So that's an area where they could compare governments and
Tap into
what,
existing knowledge.
yeah.
Anybody else? Any questions for me?
I think one of the things, I just find the easiest way to bring any kind of critical analysis into whatever the lesson plan is, especially like the last 2 years, is I really just make them come in with news and we talk about it, and then I always tie it back to either like a concept of, like right now, they just did away with term limits in China, right? And it's these real life examples so that it's not static, but so everybody comes in and we just tie it to stuff. And that is an easy, relevant way, I think, to just keep it dynamic.
And there's a lot to build from that's going on now.
You just tie it back. Yeah, it's so
actions.
easy. Rule of law, that's a good one.
First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, yeah.
There's certainly a lot in public discourse currently that is very related.
First Amendment.
First Amendment. Yep.
Do you use news and levels or a program?
No, I just tell them to watch the news in English because I want them to practice that, and then they all have to report out.
Are you sure? So I use News for You sometimes.
Yeah, news or news
That
and
one I really
levels or whichever one.
I
That's
use
a good one.
Newsella.
Yeah, Newsella.
As well.
Yeah. Do you have to pay for that?
No.
Oh, that one's free.
Like extra special content is, and like tracking students, but I don't want to do that anyway. So.
Do you ask them to read specific content from specific
No,
news
I
site, or?
just talk about why it's important to hear different accents and to hear the news is an easy way to start, hearing English, right? And so even if they don't want to speak it, they have to hear it, and then they start getting more. What's really cool, especially, I have this one guy right now from Iran. When he first, and he's been in it like 3 cycles. The first time he came in, I said, where are you from? Why are you here? And he said Persia. Mm-hmm. And I was like, whoa, you have so much philosophy to pull from. That's awesome, right? Now the 3rd time he's in this class, he says, I'm from Tehran. But he didn't even feel comfortable enough to say that the first time, right? So now this time he's talking about how the girls are wearing headscarf, taking off their headscarf and how exciting it is. And I go, okay, what's that example of? And so it's just, you have to build that too.
Yeah.
So our students, like everybody now, has smartphones, but I think they're all catching up on the news in their own language.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that they're actually, I mean,
So I
compare
just
the-
give,
if
no,
it's
I mean, I
English,
tell
how-
them news sites to listen to, and some people say, well, I'm working all the time, and I tell them about AMU on, and I put 88.5. You know, I mean, it's just so I give them the stations, we talk about why it's important, and even if they don't do it at first, I think so much of the, sometimes like 15 minutes out of an hour and a half is this discussion that people are bringing in, that I think over time, just they get comfortable with it and they try. And also, we talk a lot about it's a risk-free place. Everybody feels awkward. The only way you're going to feel better is diving in. And then I get testimonials from other students to say, yeah, my kids laugh at me, but nobody in this class will laugh at you. That kind of thing, you know. So
How much, I mean, I love the idea. I mean, I want my students to know that they are in Washington DC and everything on the news all the time is about Washington DC, and, you know, they could be the citizenship class that's closest to the Capitol or the White House. And, but how much time do you actually commit, if you make that a regular thing, how much time are you committing to that? Is that the first part of class?
yeah, it is the first part when they come in. It's like, so what happened since you last were here? And it's usually I plan between 5 and 15 minutes. Just depends on how much they
Do
want to
they
talk.
share with each other, or it's a?
It's a whole group. We sit around a table like this.
So I think that very much gets to question 4, which is inviting students to be participants, right? And how does, whether lesson plans or other things that you are doing in your classes, inviting students to participate, drawing on their prior knowledge, etc. So I think I would like to take a minute just to talk about question 5. So as pedagogues, as people who are experts in education, what perspectives or assumptions about civic education are implied in and through this lesson plan? Maybe what does that question mean?
Yeah.
So Eric had kind of an interesting observation about if you're a student in DC reading some of these lesson plans. What does that mean?
The answer is if you look at your government and you, right? Who's the governor of your state now? What is the capital of your state? Right?
Taxation without representation.
Right. What are 2 ways that Americans can participate in their democracy? Right? So your DC answer is going to vary a little bit.
Yeah, like you're saying, if you're in DC, it's going to differ completely than
Well, they all win.
I
But
wouldn't
it's
have
hard to
known
understand what's the difference between a voting representative and a non-voting delegate.
You know, something that I hear from some of our students is because we're in the nation's backyard, but we're in the state of Virginia, they don't know Richmond's the capital. You know, they forget that stuff because, you know, national news is our local news. So they're like, you know, they haven't gone down 95.
Well, in their you know, to be honest, even Northern Virginians forget that Richmond.
Well, that's true too. It's like 2 different states. So it's kind of a funny dynamic. And you can walk to Mount Vernon, George Washington's home from our site.
So the question would be like how we as educators would tackle the very same idea if we are talking about Washington DC and having the possibility of the everlasting talk about being a state and having state rights. I mean, somebody were to ask that question to us, how do we address it? That's a very harsh question.
If someone asks what?
So if somebody were to ask the idea about, we're talking about issues related to democracy and things like that, and we're talking about the district, and the district not having equal representation in Congress for its constituents, how do we address that as educators?
I say I'm angry. But I also pay taxes.
Well, teach it. I mean, but a generic thing to get into, to uncover our biases that we have in education, one bit of advice that so first of all, have a curriculum. I know usually teachers run around with a binder full of lesson plans here and there. Lay it out in a curriculum, and then about every year sit down with your colleagues and do a bias analysis. Because the choice that you make to put in your content right? I mean, that's the step one where and we have unequal, there's a power differential there, right, in society. We're sitting here, and we're kind of deciding, what to put in there, and so it's so I always recommend first, I know it's a lot of work up front, but you only have to do it once, but do a curriculum. If it's citizenship, make a CIT or ESL class, even if you're K through 12, you can't just lay it out, and then sit with your colleagues and ask them these questions and be like, hey, wait a minute here, you just threw in a whole lot of MLK stuff in here. I mean, like, you'll see where if something's being left out or something's not.
Can I just add to that? I feel like the challenge for me is deciding what to put in a way that's understandable. So you have to simplify without removing the essence of what you're trying to teach, and that can be very challenging when you're dealing with level 1 students. So if anyone has any ideas?
No, but I think that's a really important point, right?
Yes.
Because that simplification doesn't happen in a neutral way, right?
Exactly.
So if we think about like K-12 education, I teach master's students right now at MSU, and I often do a sample lesson in class about Rosa Parks, right? So I ask them what they know and what they think they know about Rosa Parks, right? And like many people, they picture like some granny, right? Who like on that day was just too tired to move, like her dogs were killing her, so she's just sitting there, right? As opposed to like 40-year-old kick-ass member of the NAACP Civil Rights firebrand, right? And so the one model of Rosa Parks is civil rights and change just kind of happens, right? It's just kind of like accident, right? And she was tired. No, she was tired of being oppressed, right? So that's what she was tired of. And that they organized as a community and got stuff done, right? But the Rosa Parks story is simplified to be, I mean, not to throw grannies under the bus. Grannies can be really like kick-ass activists as well, but she's pictured as like, my students are legitimately shocked when they see a picture of her, right? A photo of her circa that time, because they really picture she's gonna be like fully gray and just like basically like a walker, right? And be like, I couldn't move, as opposed to like, I'm making this happen, right? I'm proactively making this happen. So it's a very different model of social change, right? Like, stuff just happens accidentally versus you can move history and you can, if you organize.
Just like the other example you were giving, like MLK, everybody thinks immediately about the I have a dream, and they don't think about what he was talking about in the Riverside Church, and his views against the Vietnam War, and so many other topics.
Or the Poor People's Campaign, or all that sort of stuff.
Or the fact that he got arrested.
What?
Or the fact that he got arrested.
Yeah.
That he was a master of using media. And very familiar with the First Amendment and how the movement could use all those freedoms.
I read a book last year called The Dark End of the Street. I really recommend it if you like this history. And it's basically about Rosa Parks and other people, and how African American women were really at the forefront of the civil rights movement, and it was a response to racist sexual violence. And so it was these women that really organized themselves, and Martin Luther King Jr., very, very important, but in some ways it argues the women had done all this important legwork, all this important organizing for years and years and years, and then he came in fact, so there was internal discussions about like, what does this mean and who kind of owns it now. It's a hard read because it's got graphic depictions of this racist sexual violence, but like it's very informative.
What's the name of the book again?
The Dark End of the Street.
So I think, this kind of more general conversation is going to be transitioned to kind of the next part of Eric's talk. But I will say one thing that I do in my own class to hopefully not simplify history, but illustrate it in ways that might be a little more tangible to students, is I use a lot of Library of Congress's resources, and they actually have an amazing PD model that already exists. So they have some online PD workshops for teachers that teach you how to use their resources. So in terms of photographs, newsreels, audio recordings, and again, a lot of that is first-hand accounts or primary sources, which is things we want to be bringing into the classroom anyway. They also have their own set of lesson plans around those things, which is really great. But I know that we probably need to give some more, we are quickly running out of time, but give some more time to Eric to kind of bring us home to talk about advocacy.
So,
Sorry, we're gonna wheel this way.
no,
Oh, would you like it?
that way, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we will wheel that
So, here's a bit of this curriculum. I apologize in advance. Some of them has a page not where it's supposed to be, so, but it's not going to be too confusing, I don't think. All right, so this, I agree that having a curriculum is important, but I also believe in a generative curriculum, right, which is that working with your students and responding to events and their ideas helps you develop the curriculum. So this curriculum was generated last year, really when the ice raids really started to happen in New Jersey and the Elizabeth area. So a lot of the students were really worried about how to respond, what can they do, and then also to serve as civic educators doing know your rights sort of work, right? So not only know your rights workshops at the center, but how do you do know your rights kind of stuff when you're in the sauna or when you're on the bus, or like how do you informally encourage people to think about what their rights are and to share their questions. So one of the things that we had as a large group, we started by having this conversation, right? So based on the lawyers that work at the organization, right, these are the steps that they came up with, right, which is prepare yourself and your family, right? So if this is happening, make sure everybody in your family kind of knows. Stay silent, right? You're not forced to say anything. Do not resist arrest. Do not open the door, right? So if they're knocking on the door, right, don't just open the door. Review the warrant, right? And you can speak to this. There's an ICE warrant, and then there's a judicially signed warrant, and those things carry different legal weight. And so if it's just an ICE warrant, you actually don't have to open the door to it. If it's a judicial warrant, you have to, right? So
Make sure it's actually signed by.
you actually have to make it signed, right? So you can ask for a lawyer. Don't sign anything. Do not lie or show false documents. Document what happened and defend yourself, right? So these are sort of general statements about what you can do. And so then we asked in the conversation, what does this mean? Right? Not only kind of literally, if you're going to translate this from English so you can understand it, but what does it mean for you sort of pragmatically, right? So do you feel comfortable doing some of these things? Are you prepared to do some of these things? And then what questions do you have, right? And then here's the kind of key vocabulary that goes along with all of these things, right? So in order to have this conversation, a lot of these words students may not know in English, like to slide or to request or to give permission, to authorize, these sorts of things, right? So this is a combined kind of know your rights and ESL class where you have to kind of figure out what the English is. And then also an opportunity for them to share questions and concerns that they have. So that's kind of how we started. Then on the back side, you probably have, this form, variations of this form down here, right? This is the document that you can carry around with you in your wallet, right? So that if ICE comes, you can present them with this and it says, I'm not speaking to you, or I want somebody in English. So, but we gave them a copy of it to kind of write on so that we could walk through it to really understand what it is and not just come to the center and be like, here, you should carry this, but like what actually this is. Like what can it do? What can it do? And understand what it is that you're doing. And I think by having a photocopy of it, this one's in English and in Spanish, right? They can write all over it, they can mark it up to kind of understand what's going on. And we have multiple copies of it as well. Who is this one from? This is from the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. There's probably versions of this locally, right? So and it might be kind of interesting to compare and contrast, so your students have multiple copies of these to kind of see which each one of them do, so that they really understand what's going on. So then the kind of next way to really dive into what students were thinking about and wondering about is I led them through a gallery walk, and everybody knows what a gallery walk is? Yes? No? So a gallery walk, and I think you guys were going to do it, is you basically put like chart paper up, and then people go from kind of station to station in each one. So I put 6 pieces of chart paper up, and on them I wrote deportations, driver's license, sanctuary cities, minimum wage, municipal IDs, and protecting the poor. And so then I had students count off by 6s, and so then at that, and then go to one of the stations, and so then they just started writing down what they were thinking, either in English or in Spanish about that topic. And I would give them a few minutes, and then I would say, kind of rotate to the next station. So then they rotated to the next station. So everybody had a chance to go through all 6 stations. And I would float around kind of station to station, making sure that the conversation was still going well, see if anybody had any issues or problems. And then after everybody had gone through all 6, I said, go to the one that interests you the most, right? Which one of these topics do you really care about the most that you want to talk more about? And so then people self-selected which station they wanted to go to. And then when they were at the station, then I said, which one of these words or phrases do you think is most important, right? To kind of capture your thinking about this topic. So here, for example, for the chart paper about deportations, these were all the things that came up, students came up under deportation. So ICE, immigration, Muslim, separating families, arrest, no guarantees. By that they meant there's like kind of no guarantee of your security and your freedom, free expression, march, kind of bullying, Trump, scared, police, unfair, sanctuary, human rights, fired, equality, security, insecure, round up, like people getting round up, a lawyer, racism, a coalition, and fight and discrimination, right? And so the 5 most important terms in this group were separating families, kind of no guarantees, human rights, coalition, and discrimination. And so I asked them, so they had to talk amongst themselves using English as much as possible to pick out the terms, and then I asked each group, why did you pick those terms? Right? Why were those terms the most important, right? And so, for example, in this one, again, the kind of separating families, not surprisingly, this is always kind of on the forefront of people's minds, but also the coalition was a really important one, right? Because from their perspective, what do you do in this situation? You have to organize, you have to be in a coalition with other organizations if you're going to kind of get anything done, right? So each of the groups did this, and so then we're able to kind of negotiate using the English they had, both to kind of get their ideas down, but then also to prioritize the words that they had come up with. Okay? And then what I did is I typed up each one of the charts, and so then the next week, everybody got a copy of all the words, right, under each one of the categories, and so it wasn't just kind of like one and done, it was also a resource that they could go back to, and then here's the terms and the concepts that we talked about, so if there were any that you didn't remember what they were, we could go back and help you translate those and kind of understand those concepts, right? So as much as possible, each step of the process not only gets you someplace further, but serves as a resource that you can kind of go back to, right? So then, the next thing, if you flip to the backside, is dealing with ICE. So now we've kind of like talked about the situation, and this was like a role play, right? So if ICE is knocking on your door, if ICE is approaching you on the street, what are some things that you can say, right? So you can ask, am I free to go? If they say yes, then you can leave. If they say no, then you can say, I don't want to answer your questions, I want to speak to a lawyer, right? Or I have the right to remain silent, but do not run, right? If they want to search you or your belongings, right? I do not consent to the search, or I do not give you permission to search my belongings based on my Fourth Amendment rights. Now, this statement, I do not give you permission to search my belongings based on my Fourth Amendment rights, the syntax of that is beyond most of my students. However, the concept is not, right? So when we explain what it's about, and they understand what they're doing by invoking that, I don't really care that they're repeating it without really understanding all the nuances of the English, right? They're asserting their rights, and if they ask them to parse that syntax, it doesn't really matter, right? This is cutting to the point, like this is what I want.
There is a big assumption that the ICE official or whoever is a very professional person, and the unknown would be a possible beatdown.
Yes.
That people probably have seen on TV or anywhere else that has happened to real people.
Right. So as part of this, when we're talking about these strategies, that's always kept in mind, right? It's not like, here, as a situation happens, you have to do this regardless, right? It's like, you always have to take the temperature of the room, right? So what's the situation? What do you feel comfortable doing? What do you not feel comfortable doing, right? Not everybody feels comfortable saying, I have the right to remain silent.
Sure.
Right? And so it's all really up to what they feel capable of or what they want to do. And so it's a conversation of what strategy you're going to take, right? And then if they want to come into your house, this is kind of the process, right? So one of the best parts of this lesson was we actually had, in the space that we were in, there was a relatively large closet, like a walk-in closet storage room. So we put somebody inside it, and then somebody else came up as the ICE officer was going boom, 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 and shouting, and the person behind was going like, show me the warrant, right? And so then we actually went through the process, and some people really had fun being the ICE agent. They were able to put a little bit of extra relish on it, and other people had a difficult time with it. That reminded, when I was, a number of years ago, I was teaching an ESL class in the Haitian community in Boston, and I did this activity where we were talking about the language of bosses, right, and how bosses talk to you. And so to do that, I brought in a big black floppy hat, and so whoever was wearing the floppy hat was the boss. And so students would put the hat on, and as soon as they put the hat on, they knew the boss register right away. They'd be like, too slow, too sloppy, faster, right? And they understood how to talk like a boss like that, right? So my students understand how to yell like an ICE officer, right? So they're enacting that, right? So they have social linguistic knowledge, right? That they can share with you, even if you don't use that terminology, right? So they can share that sort of insight, right? So we did a lot of role play on this. Then some of you. So the next one should be the imperative, right? Some of you is reversed, but the next one should be imperative. So as you saw that video, when the students are, when immigrants are under attack, what do they do? Stand up, fight back. So that's the imperative, right? So to get to that, I did this Simon Says, right? So Simon says, sit down. Simon says, get up. Simon says, move around, whatever. And so then here's our model sentence, right? And the model sentence gets to the civic ed part, which is when immigrants are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. And then also the different persons, right? So when I'm under attack, when we're under attack, these types of things. And then what can you say to somebody when they're doing these types of things, right? And this is all using the imperative. So when they're hungry, get something to eat. When they're thirsty, get something to drink, right? When they smell, when you don't want them around, when they're not acting politely, when they are stealing your things, right? So not always, again, like cows are being oppressed, but like all the different ways that you're using kind of the imperative, right? Then the next page would be, or could be, this grammar around have got and has got, right? So we worked on this grammar because for those of you that have taught ESL, this is really difficult. Like these modal verbs are sometimes really difficult. Especially, I remember the first time a student looked at me when I was talking about the past perfect, and I'm like writing on the board, and I'm like, I had a good time, and they're like, teacher, that is, I was like, no, I swear to God, that's right. I swear to God, that's English. I made plenty of mistakes, but that's not one of them, right? So they're just like, I don't understand how English works, and I'm like, thanks, English. But so we're going through these modal verbs, right? So we understand how these things work, and then if you flip to the next page, that grammar is very helpful when you're out on the street chanting, right? The very traditional blank, 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 blank has got to go, right? So we do the hey, hey, ho, ho, bigotry has got to go, right? So when you're out on the streets, this is what you're chanting, right? So what I did was gave like 10 different examples of what's got to go, right? So bigotry's got to go, racism's got to go, xenophobia's got to go, sexism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, exploitation, and corruption, right? Now, in some of these cases, right, I may be introducing like new ideas that we're going to have conversations about, right? So my students didn't necessarily know what transphobia was, right? Or homophobia, right? And so, but as part of that conversation, I'm unpacking it, right? So it's not simply we're in a class dealing with immigrant rights, right? We're thinking as civic educators, and we're thinking about civic, participants. So there's the rights of lots of other communities that we have to be concerned with as well, right? That's coalition building, that's network building. And so students were very happy to hear about this sort of stuff. They immediately understood Islamophobia, right? They didn't have the term, but they were like, totally know what that is, right? And thanks for the word, because now I know what word it is. And then I had them for homework come up with a list of other things that gotta go, right? So not surprisingly, one last name came up quite often in terms of so they came into class next week, and we worked on the rhythm too. The hey, hey, ho, ho, bump, bump, bump has got to go, right? It's like a haiku, right? It's a very specific structure, and once you understand that structure, you can plug in other words. And then students occasionally would be like, they would try a word that didn't matter, right? And then I remember this one student, we're all doing this, everybody's coming up with good words, and students going on the table doing the ones that they came up with, and this one guy goes, hey, hey, ho, ho, immigrants have got to go. And everybody turned at him, he's like, just saying what other people say. he's like, not me, I don't think that, I'm just saying what other people say. So I was like, all right. So here's like your in the streets ESL combined with the have got to modal verb sorts of grammar, right? So it's not sequential, it's integrated, right? And so then finally, another thing that I did with my students as doing this was talking about self-care, right? So in the midst of being active, in the midst of sort of a very contested environment, what do you do to sort of take care of yourself, right? So it's very easy for us to, what?
Whiskey.
Whiskey. Some students said that. No, some students said they drink.
That's reasonable.
Some students said, I have a beer tonight, right? So here, when I feel worried, I like to go for a walk, or when I feel concerned, when I feel nervous, when I feel scared. So in each situation, I'm getting at what they do for self-care, and I'm also introducing different important English vocabulary, right?
Why do you have 2 lines for each?
So when I feel worried, I like to, just to give them some more options, like a couple of things to do, right? So often at times I try to have more than one, so the students don't end up thinking that there's one pat answer for that, and I think that comes up a lot, like, I remember when, like, students who are studying for the 100 questions, you'd be like, so, where does the president live? They say the White House, and you say, who lives in the White House? They're like, don't know, right? Because they just connected that phrase of that series of words to this series of words without really understanding it. So I want students to really get at kind of this issue of self-care, and then what else do you do to take care of yourself? Right, so that like, let's think holistically, let's think about taking care of ourselves, let's think about taking care of other people, right? So this took a few weeks, right? So each week it would kind of like build on it and then try to integrate both English and what they were doing at part of their protesting. And then listening to what they had to say about what they were thinking about and what they wanted to do. And then drawing on people's knowledge, right? So in-house lawyers who know what the rules are with regarding ICE, but being honest and not saying we expect everybody to act, in the same way. You're gonna do what you're gonna do, depending upon what you feel, right? But here are some options for you.
So as a citizenship teacher,
Yes.
I look at this and I'm thinking, this integrates well. I mean, we wouldn't have as many weeks to devote to this, but learning about the Constitution, about the Bill of Rights, and then specifically about the Fourth Amendment, though there are no questions on the Fourth Amendment, but to give that added whatever. So I like that. I really love that we do the role playing version of this form. But it's interesting to me that what really wasn't here, there was like a little reference to Fourth Amendment, and you said they didn't understand it, but they were going to, the idea was to learn the phrase, and then there was something about I exercise my constitutional rights. But for the citizenship students, you really want them to understand what that means.
Right.
So, and I think that, at least with my teaching, the students will always learn the answers to those questions.
Yeah.
that isn't what I think the class is about. And I think the reason my students like the class, it's about so much, it's about understanding what it is, what this country is about, this
Right.
crazy, complicated country.
It's not that they don't understand the Fourth Amendment, it's what I was suggesting is that English itself is fairly complicated, right? That sentence, I do not give you permission to search my belongings based on my Fourth Amendment rights. There's 3 embedded clauses there, right? And so I don't know that the students are gonna be able to understand all those
But it's
clauses.
the only place I saw Fourth Amendment even mentioned
Right.
here.
So
That's what I'm saying.
you unpack amendments specifically in your class?
Oh, yeah.
I really want them to,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
otherwise,
if I'm a-
what do you mean 10 amendments?
If I'm
First
a,
Amendment?
if I'm a
You know,
student that speaks very little
I know.
English, how do you
Well,
explain it?
number one is when I hear that students level 1 or whatever are studying for citizenship, I don't get it. I really think it's more important, I mean, again, this is my bias. I think it's really important for them to have, not to worry about the vocabulary and the content of citizenship while they're learning English, to really be able to get the basic English skills or enough vocabulary and rules and so forth with English. And then the citizenship at my school, once they've already applied for citizenship, they need to be minimum level 3. And in order to take the citizenship class. And even those guys often need to repeat the class again or want to before they'll apply for their
So
citizenship.
that's not practical though,
Why not?
because plenty of people are not in the period of time where they could have taken many classes of English to be able to take the citizenship test. You can jump right into take the citizenship test without knowing English. You can.
No.
A lot of people are
You
there.
can't get through the citizenship.
I'll help you clarify that a little bit. I would, of course, as educators, you want everyone to succeed, but be wary, it's very expensive. It's $725 if someone's invested in this. So, again, responsibility as an educator, do not set your student up to fail. So the test is roughly written, the only part that we had control over was those civics parts may be written at a high beginner level for those of you that do CASAs or whatnot, NRS levels. But the N400, and that's why I keep harping on teaching that part that no one wants to touch it, go there. That is complicated, and a lawyer wrote it, we have control. Like, we cannot change that. So do not, I'm gonna tell you how, do not set your students up to fail with it. So unfortunately, some students and some eligible students, if they're pre-literate, for example, they're not ready yet, it's gonna take time, they're gonna need those literacy supports for them to get there. So be cognizant of that. This is not a process where you just memorize some questions and you go there.
No. And just
Very expensive.
to clarify, like in my class, not all of the students are signed up to take the citizenship exam in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it as sort of an introduction, and they build up.
They
and
want to
may-
start. They
wanna
have a
start
long
learning.
way to go. They haven't been here 5
Yep.
years, but they want to
They want to
start.
begin to learn about what it means,
It's
democracy
their
in
goal.
America,
Yeah.
citizenship.
It's
And that's fine.
self-pay.
They have
It's a
time.
self-selection
It's
process.
self-selection. And so we will, for like the First Amendment, I'll use a lot of pictures to explain, and then I'll have them do charades, and then I'll have them match the picture with the word, and it just is a little slow going, but it's amazing what they understand, and I've had them talk about, okay, out of the 5 rights under the First Amendment, which one is the most important to you? And they think about it and they discuss it. So even it's trickier, but I feel like it can be done.
So from what I'm understanding, you would like to hold off because you think, both of you and Eli John, sorry, I forgot your name, sir.
Sean.
John, I think both of you are being realistic where you do not want to see like you want to set them up to fail. You want to start at the basics.
Right.
And then from there, expand. It's a very realistic approach, you being a lawyer, and I'm guessing you probably have some type of law background as well.
Oh, no, I'm a teacher. I'm an
But the
educator.
decision, I mean, I teach in school, and
Yeah.
the school made that decision
Yeah.
before I was even there.
Of course, and both of you are taking a very rational approach, while the rest are taking more of a ease approach where you will ease them into it, but without actually giving them the full-blown information about it, but giving them an idea about what they could be looking for through games, through interaction. while you just don't want to set them up at all.
Well, we have two tiers. Tier one are people that haven't applied, but they want to start. And then we have the tier two. We have people that come in because they've applied, or they're applying through us because we have an attorney. And then we have people that walk in because they failed the literacy part of the test, and then they get the referral to come to us from one of the intake officers. And so they come in all different forms.
And unfortunately, that's very difficult, and it's
Yes.
usually too late. So I'm addressing it not in our worldview as educators. Of course, I teach all of it, and everyone would be welcome in a civics class. But if your goal, specifically for you, because you're teaching specific citizenship, and the student's goal, not our goal, the student's goals are to get citizenship. And so in that goal, so 91% pass the first time around. So most people pass.
Yeah.
But if they don't pass the first time, only 60-something% make it through. And the reason is you have, and this is why you need to know a little bit of the process. So you only have 60 days. So if you don't pass part of the test, you only have, you have to come back in 60 days.
Right.
It's not 60 or I'll come back next year when I learn
No,
English. You have 60 days. And someone just spent $725 to do this. You have 60 days, and we all know you're not going to learn English in 60 days if you were pre-literate. If you forget a few of the questions, the 100 questions, that's honestly not a big deal. You can just you can go memorize. It's not that it's not a big deal, but you can memorize 100 questions faster than you can learn the present perfect. Have you ever questions, all that stuff. Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
I want to say it's two things. One is that being in a citizenship class somehow conveys to people that this means I'm ready to apply for citizenship. And so that's a concern. Oh, they took me in this class, maybe I should apply. And the second piece of it is that the complicated part of the English is the interview, and it's the most intense interview in English anybody will ever do, because it's about their entire lives. It's regarding their immigration history, their employment history, their criminal history. Questions can be asked in any fashion, and I have seen very high-level English students being told they failed the English pieces of the test, which I actually don't believe they failed, and I believe there's a workaround. But when the immigration officer says, have you ever failed to pay your, a federal tax? And they go, no. And then they say, well, why do you pay your taxes? And someone is just like, what? And then they don't answer, and then they told they failed because they didn't give a satisfactory answer.
So nervous anyway.
And they're nervous, and the officer has enormous latitude in the questions they're going to ask. And we want people to be confident and, anyway, so the more difficult part of the English is the interview, and they deviate from that N400.
I think this is a general issue within adult education, right?
Yes.
And this is something that as teachers you do bring to the process, is your understanding of what it takes to move through various groups, right? So if any of you have worked with high school equivalency students, whether it's GED or, I don't know, what did you guys adopt in Virginia? HiSET, right? So whatever it might be, right? So you have students who come in and you're like, oh, so what are your goals? And it's like, oh, I want to, pass the HiSET next month, right? Or I want to do the GED next month. And you're like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. And so, and you have to figure out a way to say it, so you're like, I still want you to come.
Yes, please come.
Please come, stay engaged, right? But it's not going to happen in a month. And so, I think that's your job as educators, because you know what the process looks like to be able to say, let's talk turkey, it's not going to happen that quickly.
Yeah.
It's going to be a struggle at times, right? And it's going to take real commitment from you. There's going to be bumps in the road, and I trust that you can make it, and I have faith that you can make it, but it's not going to be in 30 days or 60 days.
And I think the challenge we have in the community-based is that we can put you in the appropriate level, and you can be similar, but there are various backgrounds of education. We have from no formal to formal, so we have a little, so it's a challenge.
Right.
So that's a whole nother layer that we have, that we try to.
Right. And that's why, you know, the first stuff that I was talking about when I was in a formal citizenship class, I had 12 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever. So that was bound by a semester, right? It was bound by them going to kind of take the citizenship test. The stuff I'm doing now in Elizabeth, it's not bound by time, right? It's an ongoing process, and the students will come as long as they feel they're benefiting from it, right? And so then, and it allows us to do the kind of civic education part and not simply narrowly focus on citizenship as a kind of a legal step, right? And, you know, I'm sure if we went and looked at the stats, the students that are doing kind of both on a parallel track, I'm sure it's helping them with the formal citizenship part too, right? Because they're learning about the civic institutions, they're learning about process, they're learning English, and that kind of stuff.
And at least in my class, my students are either going to take the GED or the Maryland High School equivalency, or work toward their Maryland High School equivalency diploma. But if I didn't bring that in, there is no real large civic portion of that curriculum. So it's an intentional perspective on my part to say civic education is important.
I think you wanted to wrap up. It's like 2 o'clock.
Yeah, although, I mean, if there's still some more comments, questions about what we're talking about, I think we still have at least a few more minutes to do that, so definitely.
The only thing I was going to say is, we have all of your emails, so I was going to push
Yes,
out the
yes.
resources that I have from the Library of Congress and where those free PDs are. And they actually have a fellowship program. I don't know if anyone, you guys are like primed to be able to take advantage of it because you're here. You can apply for the summer and they walk you through all of the resources.
And I can also send you a PDF of this directly. Just email me and I'll send you a PDF of it. I can also send you links to the, I'll get you the PowerPoint too. And I'll also send you a link to the videos. I've saved them on a Google Drive, so if you want to access to see the videos and to show the videos.
So I'm curious, what did you hope would happen or emerge from this?
So that's a great question. So as I started out, that was really good, Carol.
Nice segue.
So we didn't necessarily have a definitive answer to that question. As I said, when we started thinking about this, it was we want to do something to sort of advance the cause of adult civic education and adult civic engagement. Exactly what form that should take is something that we're kind of open to thinking about. I mean, obviously, we're all three academics. That doesn't mean that we're not practically oriented as well, but clearly we have certain interests, like from a research perspective and in other ways where we can bring some value. So, for example, I had a meeting the other day with the head of education at the museum, if you know the museum.
I teach there.
Okay, so you know Barbara McCormick? Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. So I met her. We're actually gonna have some of our undergrads going over there in a few months. Maybe you're gonna be meeting with them, Carol. But I wanted to find out what they were doing about adult civic education, because most of what's on the website is about K-12.
Yeah.
Right?
Though we teach the same classes to university students.
Right,
Yeah.
but even thinking beyond university, so I was just curious. We had a great conversation. She was very open to collaborating on. She was also fairly vague, but she said, we really want to strengthen our adult education efforts, and we think there are funders out there who want to do that, but we need to show some research, some other things that will make them want to do it. So, as we think about it, we've thought about having a session like this, maybe in Baltimore, where Leah would host it at Loyola, and maybe in Philadelphia, where Drexel would gather similar groups of people and see what came out of all three sessions that would be kind of like this. Maybe we get Eric to speak 3 times. But I'm interested, we're interested in hearing your thoughts, and we have a form there to just give us some feedback on the session, and we'd appreciate if you do that. But even in the last few minutes here, if people have thoughts about, what we could do sort of to build on this, either with this same group. I've done, unrelated to this topic, I've convened other gatherings here, and we've sort of kept the initial group together to have further sessions and think about things. That's certainly something possible we could do with this group. And there were a number of other people who signed up, and I'm assuming, they didn't have umbrellas and they couldn't deal with the rain today. So, there's more people who are interested in being part of this too. So the question is, where would be value to you all as adult educators moving forward?
Well, so, the longer I do the citizenship, the more I keep thinking we need to be doing civic education for adults because, I don't know, quite frankly, I'm left of center. The election to me is all the research you need to see that people don't understand civics, right? The conversations that you see in the media are such a lack of understanding of how government works or civil society works or the need for society, quite frankly. And so I keep wondering, is how do we get this type of education to people? Because maybe they did it when they were in high school and they've all forgotten, or maybe they never got it. But the lack of understanding is abysmal. And I was a poli-sci major, I was a Fed, so my life is maybe not what's typical out there in Iowa. But this is ridiculous. And it seems to me that that's something that could help.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And that's actually a personal interest of mine as well. So that's a broader conversation that goes beyond immigrants. It goes well beyond immigrants. It goes to pretty much the entire population. And I think that is a big question, and I would love to figure out ways to try to tackle it myself, but.
Not, taking out the exclusively adult piece of that, two things. One, Center for American Progress did a very interesting session on civic literacy, civic education about a month ago. And they also had a piece where they showed what the requirements are in each state for graduation from high school in terms of some sort of civic education. Are there semesters, 2 semesters, or nothing? And I was not aware that many states are requiring a citizenship test. What, 17 states or something, which just was extraordinary.
There's about 30.
But anyway, it's very interesting. I think it's probably available, on their website, live streamed. So that, there's a whole world of people who are obviously thinking about that. I wanted to also mention that the museum, going back to the kinds of things that you do with your students, the museum has a class called Making a Change on civil rights. And I don't know if Barbara mentioned this to you specifically, but the classroom part of you can do it either in a documentary theater with a very long doc, but the classroom activity is learn about the First Amendment, the 5 freedoms, then you specifically look at how the members of the civil rights movement use those 5 freedoms and were effective in particular using the press, the media. And then your group, your table, picks an issue. It's all very condensed. It's not over weeks. It's over an hour. And then your group picks an issue, and they're going to try for where they want to make a change, make social change, and how they might, and plan that out, and which of the 5 freedoms, of which First Amendment freedoms they might be using. So it's the way it's not really designed for an ESL one, an ESL class even, but it's that's good also for adults. We do that with junior high school students and high school students. Where do you want to make a change? But I think that would lay a foundation for a class that would take on some bigger issues over a longer period of time.
Yeah, Ben.
I think this is great, and what would be good to see too would be how we could do something similar with ABE and GED students, because they have to know some civic education in order to pass the GED exam, and then those ABE students that are learning, they can they have to vote and they can get involved that way. So seeing how you can integrate something similar like what you did here, where you're integrating advocacy with teaching them the citizenship, with doing the same thing, but with studying for the GED exam or whatever their other goals are.
Yeah, good thought.
So something I was thinking about, Eric mentioned through the non-traditional students that come into an adult education program. So ones who may not necessarily be there to take a citizenship test, But I think one area to think about is, would something like critical information literacy skills or critical media information skills be necessary, particularly when students are reading the news in all different languages, from digital sources, print, social media. Just saw Facebook is in a lot of hot water. But I think what it requires, and this is coming from research that was done by Stanford, their history education group had released a study with high school students and then college students, and they did dismally on just basic information literacy skills, and being able to discern an advertisement from an actual news source, a university website that might have some slight bias, to something that would be unbiased and objective. So I do think that a lot of what happened in the elections is also an indication of, how adults of all ages might need some particular refining around really being critical with the information they read and how are they evaluating it.
I think that the hard part about that, is that oftentimes it's treated as a workshop or kind of a one-shot thing, and that's not how people's practices change, right? And so I think, when it comes to information literacy, what ends up happening, I feel like in workshops, people say, oh, look at the URL and .gov is better than .com. Says who? Right? So that's not always the case, right? So you need to triangulate, you need to double check sources and things like that, and that takes a while to figure out how to do. So you can have a workshop and invite people to the library, which is great, but it has to be part of an ongoing series. And so then I wonder who's interested and invested in that and kind of developing their own information literacy. And so one of the things that I do for my master's students is I have them draw a pie chart. And I say, all right, in this pie chart, when you read, what percentage of the time do you read to confirm your opinion, and what percentage of the time do you do to challenge your own opinion? And I'm like, be honest.
And they're like,
maybe 80-20. And I was like, me too. I was like, I'm probably 80-20 too, right? So now of the 80%, I want more nuances of the position that I have, right? But I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to spend my time reading Mein Kampf, right? I mean, I know what it's got to say. It's not really going to give me anything that I don't have already about Mein Kampf, right? But so if that's what we do, then how do we get different perspectives, or how do we challenge our certainties, right, when most of the time we read to sort of confirm what we already know, or we think we know.
Someone was mentioning the civics and Iowa. What is that?
Civics and what?
Someone was mentioning civics in the middle states and Iowa. Right. Oh, sorry about that, Maria. So to be candid, I went to a high school, I graduated from high school 7 years ago now. I went to a high school in rural Missouri, a town called Lawrenceburg, population 30,000. Poverty rate 35%. And we all take a civics exam before we graduate, we're required to. They give you the answers to the civics exam, because they need for you to graduate and get out. So, and I remember it's an oral test, and to speed up a little bit, I mean, our teacher would be like, what is the capital of Missouri? I highly recommend that you circle the answer C.
Wow.
So that's how bad, and I wouldn't say bad, but that's how some of our states are 25 years ago still. And if you live in this area going from DC all the way up to Boston, you live in a bubble.
That is true.
You live in a bubble.
That is true.
So, and I say it candidly, I'm not trying to be mean, or I'm not trying to be, I'm trying to get nowhere arrogant at all, but unfortunately people do not know how 25 years ago many states are. So, yeah.
Well, my favorite, or the most depressing image I've seen in a long time, you've probably seen it, is that this woman, at a protest with a sign that says, "Keep your government hands off my Medicaid." And you're like, you work through that? You really don't understand what's going on. And then I'm never going to forget this, in terms of people's generalized sort of knowledge of the country. When the Olympics was in Atlanta, it was at 96, I think it was in Atlanta, right? So there was a phone line for domestic Olympic ticket orders, and there was a phone line for foreign domestic ticket orders, foreign ticket orders, right? So somebody called apparently, maybe this is apocryphal, I don't know, but the person swore it happened to them. So they called and they were like, all right, where are you calling from? They called the domestic line and said, I'm calling from like Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the person on the line was like, this is the domestic line. You need to call the foreign line. And the person's like, I'm from New Mexico. And the person's like, New Mexico, Old Mexico, doesn't matter. You have to use the foreign line. It was so like in 1918.
The Department of Justice was doing things like that, well, actually, different states were doing things like having who was a foreign person incarcerated and who wasn't, they were counting certain states and locations as being as opposed to US.
Leah, did you want to comment at all? Did you have any thoughts?
I think it's been captured.
Okay.
I have some percolating thoughts.
Okay. Well, so it's still a work in progress, but obviously we're thankful you came. We're thankful
Well, thank
for
you. Thank you.
Loyola and co-sponsoring it with us here at Drexel. And we're open to any ideas you have as we go along. We'll try to keep you informed of our thinking, but we really we like this as a good start for something to be.
Thanks for having me down. Thanks for your engagement and thanks for your insight.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
And I think Eric has definitely challenged us all to continue to be humble.
Oh, yeah.
Like, clearly no one's an expert on any of this.
Right.
So
Yes, I have to
we're
add-
all working through it
I have to
together.
add a slide for Kendrick after he made a post.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Nobody's a Kendrick Lamar fan?
yeah, I know.
Yes.
I'm like, we got it.
Yeah.
Oh, we would appreciate the feedback, the written feedback, but if you want. Oh, yes, it's there, sorry.
Contributions, if you want to take some technologies or kindling, whatever.
It's a very interesting study that I was